It's gonna fall off like halfway through. It's gonna be hilarious.
All right, we're gonna start. All right. I want to begin this Pubspeak by examining David Foster Wallace's understanding of how we, as humans, construct meaning, in a very basic sense, at least. Wallace starts from the obvious observation that we are presented with more information than we can possibly absorb. Of the flood of sensations, tactile, visual, auditory, and olfactory, that bombard us every day, we consciously register only a small fraction, and remember even fewer. We can only pay attention to a select set of things, really. We necessarily filter our experience. In The Pale King, an IRS official prepares new agents for the tedium of their job. A mess is information without value. Forget the idea that information is good. Only certain information is good. Your job is to separate the valuable, pertinent information from the pointless information. The individual information has value only in the context of the total. According to Wallace, human everyday lives mirror the workspace of the IRS agents, and that we must, again from The Pale King, order the data, shepherd it, direct its flow. That is, we get to decide what we exert our mental energy on, how we think, what we pay attention to. Important to note is that we are not necessarily aware of how we are filtering life's raw surge of data. For Wallace, this choice of filter is equivalent to how we determine value and meaning. In order to manage the saturation of data, we compose conceptual structures to provide meaning. We pick and choose what we consider important. We construct meaning, our value system, in this way. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. You get to decide what to worship, he says in This Is Water. And before delving further into what exactly he means by this, I'll need to lay out a few definitions. Wallace distinguishes between the concepts of worship and belief. Belief, as DFW sees it, is the application of a value system to an individual's life. Since our choice of what we pay attention to is in effect our choice of a value system, the way we filter experience determines our manner of worship. Our attachments are our temple, what we worship, no? What we give ourselves, what we invest with faith, says a character in Infinite Jest. Worship can be conscious or unconscious, just like filtration. Belief, rather, is the conscious embrace of a principle. Belief can lead to worship, but does not always. Moreover, belief is optional, and worship is not. However, Wallace recommends that we choose something to believe in. A Quebecois separatist speaks to an American in Infinite Jest, telling him to choose your attachments carefully. Choose your temple of fanaticism with great care. According to Wallace's view, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. Nihilism, the rejection of all concepts of value, is impossible by definition, argues Wallace in This Is Water, I think convincingly. The consequence of this claim is that even those unaware of how they filter experience are unconsciously doing so, and thus worship with equal unawareness. And if we don't construct meaning according to a conscious choice, we're almost certainly embracing what Wallace terms the default state, the worship of money, sexual lure, intelligence, the worship of self. Again, from the Quebec separatists, in such a case your temple is self and sentiment. You become a citizen of nothing. You are by yourself and alone, kneeling to yourself. You stand on nothing. And from The Pale King, such a person is like leaves on the ground in the wind, blown this way and that way by the wind, and each time a gust blows it, the citizen says, now I choose to blow this way. This is my decision. It brings to mind the sinners in Dante in one of the first circles of hell, those guilty of lust. According to Wallace, it isn't that such a state is evil or sinful, but that it is unlikely to lead to satisfaction or a feeling of meaningfulness. There will always be more to be had, greener pastures, whatever the desire in question. You will always have the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. Such forms of worship are not, so to speak, livable. Our project then becomes to decide what to believe in, and to apply this to life, to worship according to it, which is much more complicated than what I just said. Unless you're lucky enough to worship according to a well-structured religion, this is a matter of picking a belief or set of beliefs that, when worshipped, will lead to a happy life, whatever that is. It's not a matter of truth, those of us in this category must admit, but of what's livable. This poses problems, solvable but possibly frightening problems, for those of us who, when grappling with religious belief, come to the conclusion that we are atheists. Because our rejection of formal religion casts us afloat in that it is a rejection of a well-structured method of constructing meaning, our elimination of this requires us to consciously determine our filtration for ourselves. But it's easy to declare yourself an atheist and then stop, to then cease thinking without determining what you do believe in instead of a typical concept of God. What, if not typical religion, you want to use to ascribe value? The tricky bit is that, according to Wallace, if we don't fill our ordinarily God-shaped hole, we will slip into the default self-centeredness, that awful weird solipsism of being lords of our own tiny skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the center of all creation. Odd as it sounds, this stumbling block of ill-conceived atheism has a lot to do with what Wallace views as the state of America, which, and I'll get to it, has, I think, a lot to do with how we in this room might conceptualize our futures. Dave's examination of American belief, or rather the absence of it, is intimately tied to his views on irony, which I won't get into here. To whet your appetite and frame for context, here's a conclusion that he draws in his essay on television and American fiction, E Unibus Plurum. I think today's irony ends up saying, how totally banal of you to ask what I really mean. And, as he says elsewhere, sentiment equals naivete on this continent. Clearly, if this is the case, even if just in the media, it leads to an environment in which it is extremely difficult for belief to be discussed meaningfully. Essentially, Wallace makes a strong case that, for the most of America, God is dead. Religion plays only a minor role in the lives of the majority of the populace. At least, it is questionable as to what extent self-professed believing Americans actually worship according to their religion, in Wallace's sense. This amounts to an unwitting cultural atheism, a lack of an inherited, well-organized value system, out of which the American must drag himself from the default setting into wide-eyed awareness, hopefully to the realization that, because they had good parents or mentors, they have something decent in place already. But this is not necessarily the case. So, if we follow David Foster Wallace, Americans tend to worship without belief and awareness, and one of the closest things we have to a uniform cultural value, at least the one we specifically would be most familiar with, is an acceptance of what I will call goal worship. Let me segue with one of the more powerful passages in Infinite Jest, one which I think illustrates this goal worship perfectly. The character Hal considers broadly his experience at an elite tennis academy and observations on friends and family. We are all dying to give ourselves away to something, maybe. God or Satan, politics or grammar, topology or philately. The object seemed incidental to this will to give ourselves away utterly, to games or needles, to some other person. Something pathetic about it. A flight from in the form of a plunging into. Flight from exactly what? These rooms, blandly filled with excrement and heat? To what purpose? This was why they started us here so young, to give ourselves away before the age when the questions why and to what grow real beaks and claws. What Hal diagnoses here is the American tendency to throw ourselves deeply and often irrevocably into a pursuit, the act of giving yourself away entirely to the idea of working in order to achieve some sort of brass ring that usually involves people feeling some way about you. The object of worship in this system is the future, the checkbox, the end goal. That isn't to say that having goals necessarily leads to dissatisfaction, but I think it's problematic to be uncompromisingly focused on end products, since it can presumably easily become a habit to replace a goal as soon as one is accomplished. To never stop focusing on the future, and thus over-appreciate the starting and ending points, sacrificing emphasis on the mode of motion in between. The platitude, "the journey is the reward," comes to mind. Let's look at this more concretely. I know a lot of kids, and I'm sure you do as well, who view themselves superficially, in that their concern for appearance, whether to peers or college admissions committees, supersedes any recognition of the present. They take the classes for grades, want the grades and pursue extracurriculars for the slots on the college applications, intend to go to a prestigious college so that they can be viewed as intelligent and accomplished, and to get a degree, and to go to med school and wake up one morning as an accredited, wealthy doctor and suddenly allow themselves to just be in the present, in a meaningful sense, for the first time in their goal-driven lives. The treacherous flaw in this goal-oriented reasoning exhibited here is the assumption that those things most important are those directly pursued. It strikes me as unlikely that anyone has ever woken up and realized they've ticked off enough boxes in their mental life list to consider themselves fulfilled and happy. The doctor is not going to suddenly jump from future thinking into contentedness. I'm more inclined to expect that the pursuit of goals goes on unless the goal-worshipping frame of mind is consciously flawed, unless we choose to filter our experience differently, to embrace another, less selfish value system. But the issue here, as Hal notices, is that such kids, himself included, are trained into this mindset before they're old enough to ask themselves, why this rather than that? The relevant quote here: like most North Americans of his generation, Hal tends to know way less about why he feels certain ways about the objects and pursuits he's devoted to than he does about the objects and pursuits themselves. We, those of us in this room sitting here, probably think of ourselves as free from this goal worship dilemma. I'd sure like to think we're exempt, but are we really sure? All of us here are individuals with drive and ambition, and there are sacrifices that come with the pursuit of the goals we carry in our heads. So here's my question. How should we think about our futures, and how should we make sure we avoid this frame of mind? I can't say I have almost any idea how to work this one out, but I think we might have to reformulate our concept of happiness, as laughable as that statement sounds. My guess is that we should stop thinking of happiness as a destination, and view it as a posture of motion we can adopt on our way to each finish line. It's not where we're going, but how we get there. More specifically, happiness could be thought of as the quality of what we pay attention to while moving from one place to the next, and what our motivations for motion are. Happiness, then, is having good answers to the questions of how are you moving and why are you moving. From this perspective, the destination doesn't matter as much. It comes as a byproduct and not as a determinant of how and why. I won't pretend for a moment to think that I can offer any general answer to the how question, since I'm confident that each person will have different tastes on this matter. We're all interested in different things, or on exerting our mental energy on different topics, after all. Motivation, too, the why are you moving, is almost certainly idiosyncratic as well. But if we're to believe Wallace, it may be satisfying to embrace something other than the self. Not for metaphysical moral reasons, necessarily, but because it might just be more satisfying. Once more from Infinite Jest. Love of your nation, your country and people, it enlarges the heart. Something bigger than the self. I find this very convincing, the notion of embracing something past the self, since I find the idea of self-serving very lonely. But since it comes down to personal choice and self-understanding, I won't insist that this is the case for everyone. I suspect that it is, but the farthest I can go is to recommend considering it carefully for yourself. All of us in this room are going to make some big decisions in the coming year, so I feel it's necessary for us to each answer these questions Wallace forces upon us. So here's where we are, framed more clearly. How do we choose what to worship that won't, to use Wallace's words, eat us alive? How do we avert not nihilism, but rather the oppressing sadness resultant from the selfishness and goal worship? How will we structure our temples, so to speak? And how do our answers cause us to reconsider our visions of our careers and futures? There aren't any universal or easy answers. It is entirely up to us to choose how we filter reality, how we make our lives pointless or meaningful, lonely or happy. Try to stay awake.
I mean, a lot of Wallace wasn't the only kind of writer that had that kind of idea where and every generation kind of has that lost in space kind of vibe where it's like, well, this time we're, it's not as much. So I guess my thing is the way I see a lot of past generations making it to a certain point was enough, in that I guess progressing to a certain point of socioeconomic success and affluence in the 50s or 60s didn't leave you empty and soulless, right? Whereas now I think we feel entitled to a different degree of self-actualization than that is, right? Like we feel entitled to have the journey also be happy, or we're sad, right? Not that, like even the hard work has to be pleasurable, right? To get to a certain point. It's not enough to be a doctor, it has to be self-serving and self-satisfying on an intellectual level.
No,
so is that like a 19 whatever to 2012 type thing, or is that an every
I don't know.
person type thing?
I think I would disagree with the idea that we have to be self-serving on our way to different goals. I think it's, I think the idea is that boiled down almost, if everything you're doing ultimately comes down to I want pleasure and I want to minimize pain, there's something really empty about that. So it's not even that we have to be having fun all the time when we're working. It's just that it's not necessarily satisfying. At least not. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, and I don't want to project, but it wouldn't be satisfying for me. Bill.
You said that, like, if you're just trying to minimize pain, maximize happiness, that's empty. What does that mean to? If it's making you happy, how is it empty?
I'd say pleasure, not
Okay,
happiness.
pleasure. Well, pleasure's making you happy. How's it empty?
Well, I mean, I think that sort of gets back to the idea of it's sort of up to you.
Right.
But it's the concern is that if we don't think about it, we might not be living in such a way that we actually are achieving the happiness or are living with the happiness we want.
Okay. I'm having trouble understanding how, since this is such, this happiness is such a subjective thing. Like,
Yeah.
Who determines what the happiness we want is? Like, if we feel it's good enough for us,
Then
why
it
is
is.
that not good enough?
No, it is.
Okay.
Then, yeah. Rebecca.
I can just sort of respond to what you were saying. I think one of the things is like you can have sort of a superficial happiness where life is pretty good and nothing's really going really wrong per se, but that doesn't necessarily mean. Hold on, doesn't necessarily mean like you're really. I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but living life to the fullest. For maybe more content. For example, one of the older women at my church I got really, really close to. And she was great. I really loved her. She was a great woman to be around, and I invested, a lot of love and, stuff into that relationship, and she did the same. And a year ago she died. Now, her dying made me sad. But do I regret doing that? Like, I'm not happy that she died, but I'm also very happy or content or something that I still got that relationship. So that's sort of what I mean.
I'm just not sure. I'm not sure where this this fuller sense of happiness is exactly derived from, and it seems awfully selfish and projective and judgmental to say that like you're not happy like you want to be happy. Like, I don't know, I'm getting a very, very projected vibe from all of this, and it seems a bit judgmental.
Well, I guess I'd say read his stuff and feel what you think about it. Tree.
I guess kind of going off of this whole discussion of what is happiness and how to define happiness kind of thing, I guess, at least from what I understand of what you said, of what, Wallace said, is like, he's kind of not necessarily saying that what we define as happiness is bad, but I think he's kind of saying that we should question it, because kind of like, is happiness really the absence of unhappiness, or is there more to it than that? And I don't think he's saying that, no, like this is happiness. I think he's just asking us to question it, and then once we question it, if we think, okay, this is good enough, that's okay, but I think all he's asking is that, or all he's saying is that we should question it. I don't think he's saying that we should do this or we should do that, and I guess the question he's asking is really, is happiness the absence of unhappiness, I guess, or am I understanding this?
Well, it's like the difference between I think to sort of refocus it would be like his concern is that lots of people might live their lives like Hal, in that, for instance, Hal like gets up every day, plays tennis for hours, studies all the time, doesn't really have a lot of fun, and he doesn't actually enjoy tennis all that much. So the idea is that if you're spending all your time doing things that that really you don't connect with, you're sort of isolating. Yeah, there's sort of a problem with that maybe, unless you think about it and decide it's okay. I don't know. Does that make sense? Okay, Kathy.
I don't know. Yeah, sorry. I don't want to be like. I don't know if this is what Joe was asking, but I guess like, what would you have to say to like, because I look at like my parents' generation, and maybe I don't know, maybe it's a mutual thing, but I see a lot of where. I mean, I feel like hard work to them, or your idea of like a very goal-oriented work to them, is sort of a different conception from ours. Like, I feel like with us, the whole idea of like, you work to get into school, and then you go to school so you can get a job, and you go to get a job so you can provide for your children is, like, I mean, I guess like when you think about that, at least for me, it's like you're kind of afraid of it because you think that that's going to lead to a point where you know you wake up one day and you're 45 and you think, oh, I haven't actually lived anyway. But like for my parents' generation, I feel like that's a very accepted way of living, and like I don't see them leading unfulfilled. I mean, I don't see my parents leading exceptional lives, but I don't see them living unfulfilling lives. So, I wonder, like I guess like I'm asking, like, do you think that our need for the process, or like our idea of self-actualization, if you will, is that itself a kind of self-serving idea that we're privileged to?
Yeah, so I think it might come down to the motivation behind the goal seeking. So, I mean, I don't really know all that many people of like I don't go around interviewing like middle-aged people about why they took their career paths, but I think it's like there might be this notion in that older generation of we're working today so that we can have a well-fed family and pay for our kids to go to school. That may not be the case for everybody who's adopting that goal-oriented mindset. I think the key issue is just for people to think about it and then decide whether or not they're okay with what they're doing. I don't know. It's pretty subjective. Joe.
Let me just recharacterize what I said maybe a little bit, maybe add on to what Kathy said. I guess the idea is that, and I'm speaking kind of from a bunch of families I know that are first-generation immigrants, maybe like 6 or 7. I noticed that in them, when I'm talking about the parents, let me rephrase. So Wallace raises the ceiling a bit higher, or he thinks that we've raised the ceiling a bit higher than in previous generations. Because I'd argue that a lot of these families, it's good enough for the kid, like if the kid worked at McDonald's minimum wage, but could survive until however old they wanted, that would be success, because it would be better than whatever they had, right? Or like it doesn't matter. Like you don't. It's not like you go to college and then you whatever.
Right.
Like white fence and so on. And is the idea that we've kind of raised the ceiling higher than we can reach maybe a bit like it's a interesting and self-propagating idea, because like is that really what's going on? Are we the first generation to grapple with that sort of thing? Because it seems that a lot of people were more than happy with what was had previously for them and their kids, but only now is this culture kind of coming around in our corner of America, right? And it's pretty pervasive, right? Like the whole thing arguing against the goal-oriented. And is that a function of like post-industrial democracies like ours? Like would that have happened in anywhere else? Like it can't happen in a caste system. It can't happen in a socialist system. So like where does that kind of?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Angie.
Okay, I guess one comment was this, I think it's very easy to say this is like each generation is different, and like because we're adolescents we feel like this is the first time anyone has gone through it, but like I feel like maybe more so in a capitalist / market economy, but I feel like every generation goes through, what am I doing? Am I doing it for me, for society? Like how do I balance what I want with like what my expectations are? And I guess like my parents chose one extreme because they didn't have it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because they didn't have material security.
If we had talked with our parents as teenagers, it might have
maybe.
been.
And then that's what they want. So maybe now that we have material security, we want what we don't have, in a sense. We want to be free from material security because we have the material security. I guess my question / comment is, and this is a bit like the conversation I had with Julia at lunch, is that I'm skeptical that any of us, like I feel like it's almost a bit arrogant to say that we have any idea what will make us happy. Like I can say that I wanna be self-fulfilling and I wanna travel and material well, this is my goal, but like in the end, to me that doesn't answer the question. Like I still I'm skeptical that I will ever reach the point where I will know what makes me happy. And like I feel like your conception of like, you know, what worship should you choose, what type of worship, almost assumes that we know like what's best for ourselves, and I'm not sure that we do. So I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts about.
Well, I think the idea is that it's like I think it might just be it might actually be enough to be aware that you're making some conscious decisions about what to pay attention to. In that if you find something's not working, you can adjust that. Whereas if you're not aware that that's happening, then you're sort of just going off in a direction without having necessarily control over it. That doesn't really answer your question, but I'd have to think about your question more to answer it. Connor.
I guess when you're going through your speech, like a couple, and during the questions, there were a couple like examples from like outside world pops into my head. I was interested in knowing what you or Wallace, I guess, would think about that. The first would be, you know, the movie It's a Wonderful Life.
No, I don't actually.
Okay, well, it's from the late 40s, and basically the premise of it is there's this guy named George Bailey. He spent his whole life in this small town, Bedford Falls. His father owns a tiny bank, the savings and loan, or building and loan. And his dream, like ever since he was a little kid, is to be get out, to see the world, and like just be like get out of the town and never look back. But like things keep going against him. So first, just when he's about to go off to college, his father dies, and so he decides to send his brother to college. So he'll stay. So George has to stay in town and manage the building and loan. And then the agreement is that when his brother graduates, George can go off to college, and his brother will take over. Puts down roots there, but he never lets go of the dream. The dream and like all his work is like, I'm eventually going to get out someday, but he never happens. And so time goes by and keeps going on until the Great Depression hits, and actually no, it's not that run on the bank. It's there's a figure in the town named Mr. Potter who manages the other larger bank. He owns most of the town, and Potter messes with the building and loans finances, so that they're going to be found like guilty of malfeasance, and George's going to go to jail. So he's contemplating suicide when this angel appears to him and starts telling him, like, takes him through his life and shows him what the town would have been like without him. And the line is where the angel says, you know, George, you really had a wonderful life, and he realizes that like the life that he's had is sufficient in and of itself. He never really needed that dream. He has everything he's ever wanted.
Yeah, it's sort of that idea. And I think a lot of it has to do, I mean, the guy clearly felt some sort of obligation to the town and to family members. I mean, I think that would be an example of something more satisfying than hedonism. I don't know. That's my personal preference, though. So,
if I could just say one more thing, do you remember the line from Hamlet when Hamlet's talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? He's like, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself the king of infinite space, but for that I have dreams.
Well, I do now. So.
And I guess you could say, because immediately after that they go into like a conversation on ambition, and they say like Hamlet says something like ambition is just a shadow of the beggar is so much more solid than the king, so much more substantial. I was wondering if like that sort of fit with what Wallace was saying about like being goal oriented.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I need to like look at the actual thing. You know, it's Shakespeare. It's a little. Well, it's a little hard to tell what he's saying. All right. Yeah. Will.
Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the backdrop of this question is. Will, do you want to put this question explicitly?
I'm wondering how you have gone about choosing values in your own life, and I'm imagining that perhaps Boy Scouts played a role in that. I'm just guessing because you seem like sort of that kind of guy.
All right. So, yeah, when I was thinking through all these ideas and sort of like trying to come up with answers to the questions that sort of got provoked, it was kind of scary because I realized I had never sat down and thought through, well, what do I actually believe in? if not God. And so I eventually decided that it was sort of a combination of things I really cared intensely about, and then like these sort of senses of like duty to like family in particular. But I think what Boy Scouts did is that it trains you into this mindset where you're paying attention to like how to help other people, and it's the whole. I think the whole power of the motto, the much mocked motto, "Be prepared," not be prepared. That's not what I'm. Do a good turn daily. That's the one. Is